For 61 years, the Bellamy House had been the tallest thing in Marrow Bend, and on a cold Saturday in March, the county sold what was left of it off a flatbed parked in the hotel's own side yard. The wrecking crew had been at the building since the first thaw. What they could not sell, they burned in a barrel by the alley, and what they could sell, they dragged out into the mud, stacked in rows, and numbered with a grease pencil, and the whole of it came to 94 lots. Bathtubs, radiators, 200 feet of brass stair rail. The lobby clock, which went for more than anybody expected, to a dealer from Cutler City who had driven up in a car with white wall tires. Doorknobs by the bushel basket. The kitchen range, so heavy it took 4 men and a plank to walk it onto a truck. Lot 61 was a stack of oak. That was how the sale bill put it. Oak paneling, miscellaneous, approximately 20 pieces, as is where is. And that was how it looked. Somebody had laid the sections flat on 2 timber skids under a tarp that had blown half off in the night, and the rain had gotten into the top pieces and darkened them. Turned columns lay on their sides like fence posts. A long slab of white marble with one corner broken away leaned against the heap, and 4 crates of mirror glass packed in excelsior sat beside it, and nobody wanted to touch those because nobody wanted to be the man who dropped one. Roy Sheldon, the auctioneer, got to it at 20 past 1 and did not linger. 61, he said. Oak, the whole pile, won money. Who will say $50? 50. Nothing, not a hand, not a nod, not a lifted catalog. 25 to start it then. Somebody give me 25. Hollis Ray, who ran the wrecking crew, lifted 2 fingers off his clipboard without looking up. He did not want the carving. He wanted the wood, split and stacked, to feed the barrel through the rest of the job. 25 I've got. 30 anywhere? 30, 75. It came from the back, from a man leaning against the fender of a green pickup with his arms folded, and the crowd turned to look the way a crowd always turns. Emmett Rausch had not spoken all morning. He had bought a box of brass hinges at 11 o'clock and nodded at the neighbors he knew. And otherwise he had spent 3 hours walking slow circles around Lot 61 with his hands behind his back. Roy Sheldon blinked at him. 75. $75 for the oak. Anybody else? Nobody else. The gavel came down on the flatbed rail with a flat wooden knock, and Hollis Ray shrugged and went back to his clipboard. And a man in a mustard-tan jacket standing near the front turned all the way around to find the bidder and laughed out loud. That man was Dale Prosser. He picked estates and store fixtures for 3 shops downstate, and he had come to Marrow Bend for the brass, and he stood there in the mud with his mouth open and said, loud enough for 4 rows of people to hear it, $75. For wet paneling. My friend, you have just outbid a fire. Emmett Rausch did not answer him. He walked up to the clerk's table, paid in bills, took his yellow paper tag with the number and the price written on it in pencil, and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he went and looked at the pile one more time and knelt down at the end of it and ran his thumb along the underside edge of a section where nobody had bothered to sand. By 3 o'clock the yard was mostly trucks and taillights, and the joke had gone around twice. $75 for a woodpile you have to load yourself. $75 for rain damage. Roy Sheldon, folding up his stand, said the only sensible thing anybody said all day, which was that a man who spends 3 hours walking around one lot before he bids on it generally knows one thing the crowd does not, and that he had learned a long while back not to ask which thing it was. Dale Prosser loaded 400 pounds of brass stair rail into a trailer, drove downstate, and did not think about Marrow Bend again for 3 months. Emmett was 63 years old that spring, and he had been a joiner since he was 14. He had done 40 years of the work nobody photographs: church pews, store counters, coffin lids in a bad winter. He had rehung every door in the Cutler County Courthouse twice, and rebuilt the pulpit stair at Bethel Chapel after the flood, and he ran a shop out of a converted dairy barn behind his house on the Ridge Road with his own name painted on nothing at all, because everyone who needed him already knew where he was. His father had been a joiner before him, in a shop with a treadle lathe and no power in it until after the war, and the thing he had drilled into Emmett before Emmett was old enough to be trusted with an edge tool was this: you judge a piece by the places the maker believed nobody would ever look. Anybody can polish a front: the back of a drawer, the underside of a rail, the blind end of a tenon. That is where a shop tells the truth about itself, because that is the one place it has stopped performing. Wood does not lie about what it is, his father used to say, only the finish does. Cora, his wife, had gone with him to the sale mostly to see the hotel one last time. She had waited on tables in the Bellamy House dining room for 2 years before they married. On the drive home, with the truck empty and the pile still sitting in the yard behind them, she asked him what he had bought. "Bar back," Emmett said. "Out of the saloon?" "Out of the saloon." She thought about that for a mile. "Emmett, that thing was as long as this truck and a half." It was longer, he said, what he did not tell her, because he was not sure of it yet, and he was not a man who liked to be wrong out loud, was what he had felt with his thumb. The underside of that section had been worked with a hand plane and then left, the way a shop leaves a surface that will never be seen, and the tear-out was almost nothing. Whoever had run that plane had known exactly where the grain rose. And when Emmett had gotten his head down into the shadow under the skid, he had seen, cut into the back of the panel with a chisel, and not written in pencil, a set of small, clean Roman numerals. Assembly marks. Cut, not scratched. In a shop where somebody cared. It took him 3 trips and 2 days to bring it home, and Sam Ott brought his flatbed and his boom over on the Sunday to help with the long pieces. They laid it all out on the barn floor in the order Emmett wanted, and when it was down and the tarps were folded, the barn had no room in it for anything else. Marrow Bend enjoyed itself considerably that spring. Down at the feed store, they said, Emmett Rausch had bought himself a saloon and forgot to buy the whiskey. They said he had paid $75 for kindling with dents in it. Verna Kittredge, who ran the diner on Sedge Street and kept the County Historical Society's files in a cabinet behind the pie case because there was nowhere else to keep them, told him to his face that he had lost his mind, and then asked him, in the same breath and a different voice, whether the mirrors had come through whole. 3 or 4, Emmett said. There's one gone. Which? One. Center, Verna looked at him over her glasses for a second longer than the question needed. He started in October, when the field work was done and the shop had a stove in it. He did not start by building, he started by reading. He went over every section on both faces with a lantern and a wire brush and a rag, and he wrote in a school notebook what he found. 22 pieces, not 20. 4 turned columns and 2 half columns. A canopy in 3 parts with a dental course under it. 2 shelf standards with carved consoles, a back wall of raised panels, a counter frame. The marble, the mirror crates, and on the back of every single piece, cut into the oak with a firmer chisel by somebody who had done it 1,000 times. The numerals. 1 through 28. Emmett sat on an upturned crate in a cold barn and looked at that for a long time. He had 22 pieces. The marks went to 28. Over the winter he cleaned it, and where he cleaned it, the wood came back. Under 60 years of smoke and lamp black and spilled beer, the oak was not brown at all. It was the color of dark honey held up to a window. The carving on the console brackets was grape leaf and wheat, undercut so deep he could get his little finger behind a leaf, and every leaf was different from every other leaf. And there were 41 of them. Nobody carves 41 different leaves for a room where men look at the mirror and not the wood, unless the shop that made it was proving something. There was one bad week in December. A canopy section had sat wet under that tarp long enough to move, and it had taken a bow across 4 feet that no clamp Emmett owned was going to argue with, and for 3 days he could not see a way through it that did not end in cutting new stock and carving a dental course he was not at all certain he could match. He came in at 11 one night and sat at the kitchen table with his hands flat on it and did not eat. Cora poured him coffee he had not asked for. "They're saying at the feed store you've gone soft in the head," she said. "I know what they're saying. I didn't say I agreed with them." She sat down across from him. "Emmett, you've told me since March that whoever built that thing was better at this than you are." He was. "Then he had this same trouble," Cora said, "and he fixed it, and you'll find out how if you go and look at what he did on the other end. He steamed it straight over a stove kettle in 9 hours, the way the other end told him to. He raised the back wall first, in January, with block and tackle and Sam Ott and a great deal of profanity, and set the columns, and the canopy went up in 3 pieces on a Saturday when it was 9 degrees outside. Cora came out with coffee and stood in the barn door and did not say anything for a while. 20 feet of it, 9 feet tall at the canopy. Columns turned and reeded, mirrors bevelled an inch wide at the edge so that when the lantern moved, the whole thing threw little rainbows onto the barn wall. The marble counter went on last, and the broken corner sat there like a missing tooth, and it did not matter at all. If you've made it this far into Emmett Rausch's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Because standing back from it with the lantern up, Emmett could see the thing plain that the marks had been telling him since March. It was not finished. It was not even symmetrical. The bar ended on both ends in a raw vertical edge, mortised, with the mortises empty. Whatever went there had been pulled off and taken away, and the sections numbered 23 through 28, 6 pieces, were gone. Enough for 2 end towers, 1 on each end, with their own columns and their own mirrors and their own canopies. The bar was not 20 feet. It had been built to something closer to 30. Emmett went to see Verna Kittredge about it on a Tuesday in February, and Verna went into the cabinet behind the pie case and came out with a box of the Bellamy House papers that the family had given the Historical Society when the last of them moved away. Registers, menus, a photograph of the dining room with the table set for a banquet, and down at the bottom, a folder of receipts. They found it at 9:10 at night, with the diner closed and the chairs up on the tables. A bill of sale, 31 years old, from the Bellamy House Hotel Company to Dowd Hardware of Marrow Bend. 2 oak fixtures, ends, from the bar room, $10. $10, Verna said. They cut it down to fit, Emmett said. They must have taken the ends off to get the room in behind the bar and sold them for whatever anybody would give. Verna took her glasses off. Emmett, I have looked at Warren Dowd's front window every day of my life. Dowd Hardware had 2 glass display cases flanking the front door and had had them for as long as anybody in Marrow Bend could remember. They held bench visors and pocket knives and, at the top where nobody looked, a fly rod. They were oak. They had turned columns on the corners and a deep carved canopy above and beveled mirror in the back, and everybody in town had leaned on them their whole life without ever once raising their eyes. Warren Dowd, who had inherited the store and the cases together, listened to the whole story standing behind his counter with a pencil in his hand. Then he walked over, opened the near case, took out the fly rod, and got down on his knees with a flashlight and looked at the back of it for himself. Number 25. Cut, not scratched. Well, Warren said, he stayed down there a good deal longer than he needed to. When he got up, he did it with one hand on the counter, and then he stood and looked at that case the way you look at somebody at a funeral you have known your whole life and never once looked at properly. There's a hole in the top rail where my father tacked the price string, he said. I have leaned on this thing every working day since I took over the store, and I could not have told you what it was made of. He would not take money for them. He said he had bought them from his father with the building and had never once thought of them as anything but 2 cases, and that if they belonged to something they had better go back to it. He asked for one thing in exchange, which was that when it was standing, wherever it ended up standing, he wanted to bring his wife and see it. It was the 6th section, number 28, that gave up the secret. It was the center panel of the back wall, the wide one behind where the missing mirror should have been, and it was the only piece on the whole bar that had been face-nailed. Every other joint in the thing was cut and pinned and fitted with a fussiness that bordered on showing off, and then this one panel was held with 4 square nails driven through the face and puttied over. Somebody had put them there later, and when Emmett drew them and lifted the panel out on a Thursday afternoon in March, there was a cavity behind it 8 inches deep, lined and dusted and dry as flour, and it was not empty. There was a linen roll tied with tape. There was a flat wooden case about the size of a breadboard, and there was a photograph in a paper sleeve. The linen roll was the shop drawing, full size where it mattered, in ink, every column and console and dental laid out and dimensioned in a draftsman's hand and along the bottom edge. In a title block ruled with a straight edge, the whole of it. Back bar, pattern no. 4. For the Bellamy House, Marrow Bend. Hessler Cabinet Works, Blackford City. Drawn A&D, carved by A. Hessler, the wooden case held 6 carving gouges wrapped in oilcloth, still bright. A carver's own, not a shop's, because the handles had been shaped by a hand that had used them for years and had worn hollows into the boxwood. The photograph showed a slight man in his 40s in a shop apron over rolled shirt sleeves, standing in front of the bar in a bare hall with shavings up to his ankles, not smiling. On the back, in pencil, my last A&D best. Let it stand longer than I do. Emmett Rausch sat down on the barn floor in the sawdust and held that photograph in both hands for a good while before he went in the house to tell Cora. The rest of it happened faster than Emmett wanted it to. Verna wrote 3 letters. The one that came back was from Dr. Helen Sturgis, a curator at the State Museum, who telephoned the diner because Emmett's house had no phone. and who drove 4.5 hours the following week and walked into that dairy barn in a tailored charcoal suit and stopped dead in the doorway with her hand still on the latch. Anton Hessler had run the Hessler Cabinet Works for 19 years and had built, by the surviving order books, 41 bars. The works had burned. Almost everything it made had been in buildings that were themselves torn down or gutted, and pattern no for. The exhibition piece, the one Hessler had drawn and carved himself and shown at a regional exposition where it had taken a medal, was listed in every reference on the subject as destroyed. There were 2 photographs of it in existence, and one of them was in a paper sleeve in Emmett Rausch's barn. Dr. Sturgis spent 2 days on her back under the canopy with a flashlight, the same way Emmett had. On the second afternoon, she told him that a lesser bar out of the same shop, missing its mirrors, had gone to a museum in the East for $22,000, and that this one was not a lesser bar, and that she would like to know what he intended to do with it. Word travels. Dale Prosser came up the Ridge Road in June in a car that did not belong on that road, and stood in the barn doorway in his mustard-tan jacket with his hat in his hand, and he did not laugh. He looked at it for a long minute. Then he said, "I stood 10 feet from that pile, and I never got down and looked at the back of one board." "Most don't," Emmett said. Prosser named a figure. Emmett said no. Prosser named a bigger one, and then the name of a hotel in Cutler City that wanted it, and Emmett said no to that too, and then Prosser did the only thing that ever redeemed him in Marrow Bend's telling of it, which is that he took his coat off, hung it on a nail, and asked whether he could help hang the mirror, because that was what was left. Verna Kittredge had found a glass shop 2 counties over that still cut a 1-inch bevel by hand, and the center mirror, the one that had been gone from the crates in the first place, cost more than the entire bar had. Emmett paid it without a word. The Bellamy House was a parking lot by then, and nothing was going to change that. So the bar went where the town could get at it. The old Cutler County Bank building on the square had been standing empty with its high ceilings and its good light, and between the Historical Society, the State Museum's loan program, and a subscription list that Verna kept taped to the diner's register until it had 406 names on it, the building became the county museum, and the Hessler Bar became the room you walk into first. It went up over 11 days in October. Emmett set every section himself and let other hands do the lifting, and when the 2 end towers came off Warren Dowd's flatbed and slid into their empty mortises with a 1/4 inch to spare after 31 years apart, there was a sound out of the crowd on the sidewalk that Cora said afterward she had never heard a crowd make before. 30 feet of carved oak, 9 feet to the canopy, 41 grape leaves, and not one of them the same. They lit it for the first time on a Saturday in November with the doors standing open and a square full. Somebody had turned up 4 burner fixtures of the right pattern and wired them, and when the switch went over, the beveled edges of 6 mirrors threw the light back across the old bank lobby in bands, and every carved leaf on the thing came up out of the shadow at once with its own edge on it. Warren Dowd brought his wife, as agreed, and stood at the near end with his hat in his hands and did not say a word for 10 minutes. Verna Kittredge cried and denied it. Dale Prosser drove up from downstate, stood at the back where nobody would make anything of it, and bought nothing at all. Under the center panel, where the cavity was, they set a small case of glass. In it are 6 carving gouges with hollows worn in the boxwood handles, a photograph of a slight man in a shop apron who did not smile, and a linen drawing signed by his own hand. The plate on the wall says the bar was made by Anton Hessler and lost for a lifetime, and underneath, in smaller letters, that it was recovered by Emmett Rausch of Marrow Bend. And tacked to the frame of that case, behind the glass where the light cannot get at it and fade the pencil any further, there is a small yellow paper auction tag. Lot 61. Oak paneling, Misk, $75. Emmett kept the shop going another 9 years. He never much liked being asked about it, and when the newspapers came, he mostly talked about the plain work on the undersides, which nobody printed. But Verna says that once, late, with the diner closed and the chairs up, he told her the only thing he had ever thought about the whole business that was worth repeating. He said a shop cuts its numbers into the back of a piece so that a stranger, someday, in a barn, in the cold, with a lantern, can put the thing back the way it was meant to be. He said the marks are a letter. He said Anton Hessler had written to him across 60 years and about 1,100 miles, and had told him exactly what to do, and every part of it was true. And all it had ever cost anybody was the trouble of getting down on the floor to look.